Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. So let's get into this. Today we're joined by a special guest. You know them, you love them. It's Jerry.
Yes, Jerry. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you very much for asking. Yeah, I'm okay.
Good. Glad to hear it. Listen, Timbo, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about crossing the sexual divide.
Yes. So, Jerry, you actually reached out to us. You'd said, oh, are you looking for people to maybe come on and share their experiences? And so keen to have you on. And when we were talking about like, oh, what are some of your experiences? What are some things you think you could speak to? Baby, you gave us a list. You have done a lot in your life, a lot of it that relates to gaming too. But the thing that really stood out to me most is the fact that you have said you've had gainer relationships and experiences with both men and with women.
Yes.
And I just think that's fantastic. I don't think we hear nearly enough about all of that. And I think there's so much that we could all learn from each other, both in the straight identifying community, in the gay identifying community. And there's probably a lot that's the same and a lot that's different. So I think today is going to be a really great opportunity to learn a little bit something different for everyone involved. So look, let's kick things off with question number one. You're someone who is engaged with both men and women. Do you feel that your sense of openness with gender has had any influence on your approach to gaming?
Well, I would say that it has. As I jotted in my notes, I don't feel guilty about having to focus my gaze on either gender. As someone who dated I dated a woman who was a little overweight and actually appreciated the fact that I was, and I put on a lot of weight for her. I actually felt comfortable knowing that there was somebody out there, as far as, on the heterosexual side, who liked my size and wanted me to be bigger. But most of my interactions in gaming have been with gay guys who've seen me as somebody who they find attractive. And I've actually dated briefly one gainer, an old friend of mine from Los Angeles. Sadly, that did not pan out. But it's allowed me to feel comfortable knowing that at one point there was a woman who found me attractive because I was fat, and numerous men who found me attractive as well because I was fat. So it's allowed me to look at things from both sides equally without having to feel restricted, saying, oh, I'm a big guy, only big guys will like me. And I can honestly say, oh, I'm a big guy, women have liked me. And there's still always a possibility that women might, find me attractive. Although, as far as that's concerned, that's a ship that sailed many moons ago.
That's understandable. Can I ask, how would you say you identify sexually? Would you classify yourself as bisexual?
I would say queer, bisexual by default, although I'm open to the idea of dating somebody or being friends with people who are non-binary, gender fluid, etc. So I'd probably say bi, optionally pansexual. I don't really try to label myself either one, just because I'm not saying it gets me into trouble or anything, but I'm still working on it to try to figure out exactly where I fit, whether I lean convincingly bisexual or more incidentally pansexual. So until I've kind of figured that out, I just go with bisexual and leave it as such.
I think that's perfectly fair. And, this is a moment for all listeners. If you are anyone out there who is questioning your sexuality for any reason and exploring different alternatives, use different labels, try new things, and don't feel a need to settle on something if it's not quite the perfect fit for you. Labels are there to help us. They're not supposed to confine us. So have fun with it and just see what happens. Like, Tim, you're also, as someone who's probably been around the community for a bit longer, have you had the opportunity to interact much with women in the community?
In the gainer community specifically?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, of course, is that you're a gold star gay, right? Like you've
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I don't I think
Yeah.
contextually, I hadn't imagined that you'd had interactions with women sexually, but I was curious to know if you'd at least had some form of engagement conversationally like that.
The only place I've ever had that happen is I'm on Phoebe, and because that's really like geared towards the cishet world, like I've had a few female gainers like compliment me there, and or feeders, you know, however they identify, because I didn't actually ask, but um beyond that, not really, because the Grom offs that I've been to were all men, and pretty much everything I've done in the gay community has been all men, except for, you know, whenever the gay guy brings his best girlfriend along. Like, so no, I really haven't had a ton of interaction with women in the world of gaining. I mean, I'd like to. It's just we kind of exist in different spheres.
Well, maybe that's a good follow-up question then, Jerry. You've had these experiences with both men and women in a sort of gaining context. Do you feel that the sort of same-sex attracted sphere of human and the typically opposite sex attracted spectrums are very divided, or do you think there's a lot more overlap than people realize?
I do think there's a lot more overlap. I liken it to two trains that are on separate tracks. They may get very close to crossing, but they generally don't. One thing I've kind of discovered as part of a follow-up to some of these questions is I noticed a lot of straight people who are gaining, it kind of falls within, the word I'll use is, what's what I'm actually using? Give me a second.
That's okay.
It is what it is, comes with the territory. Because a lot of straight people that I know who put on weight, a lot of them do it because they find themselves, they want the extra weight and they want to feel comfortable with it, but they don't think about it in terms of a sexual context. I know a lot of straight couples who are overweight. I'm not saying they're not gaining or not saying there's a feeder relationship, but when you kind of settle down and you find that person that you're going to hopefully spend the rest of your life with, how you look basically goes out the window. You've found that person, you're spiritually connected, you're physically connected, you live your life the way that you're going to live your life. And if you just happen to put on a whole bunch of weight as a married couple, that's to be expected, you know. I do think a lot of times in the gay community, we focus more on the food and sexual aspect of it, to find somebody who enjoys eating, but also wants to be sexually intimate, you know, with somebody who is fat. So I do think that's kind of where some of it overlaps and where some of it doesn't, because there's that proclivity to say, oh, I'm a big guy, I'm interested in dating a woman, you know, will she like me for who I am, how I look? Let me turn on my personality, let me let it shine. If she sees past that, then it doesn't matter how big it is, big I am. But what I do discover is, at least for some of the gay guys, or most of them, it's more so a physical attractiveness first. You know, you like how a guy's face looks, you like how he looks, face, belly, butt, whatever. And you focus more on that physical aspect, and then you kind of hope that they have a genuine personality to say, hey, this guy's really big and really fat, but he's actually nice to talk to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I feel like I talked to James about this before, how I feel like, you know, gay men especially, we're like visual creatures, you know, like where everything's wrapped up in aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you're into Twinkie boys, everything's wrapped up in that
Mm-hmm.
aesthetic. If you're into chubby boys, everything's, you know, same thing.
Yeah.
It just seems to be a marker of like, how can I articulate this? It's almost as if like everything that was sort of like typically about how like men think and the way that they handle things and the way that they see things all got funneled into like into gay men, and it's like we took it and we ran with it.
Well, I mean, I've said something similar before, in that, growing up in a Christian background and coming out as gay, you do realize that you are raised to view women as your sexual object, and therefore you focus your desires on that. And when we come out as gay and identify as gay, we don't actually introspect on that. We don't actually do the deep dive into, oh, wow, we can actually change this. all we do is we shift our focus from the women that we were told to focus on to the men we now focus on. And when men do that to each other, it creates this feedback loop, which I think is a big part of why, you go from having just gays in a club together to twinks and bears to twinks, otters, pups, daddies, gym bunnies, gym rats, bears, muscle bears, chubs, super chubs, dolphins, seals, elephants, tigers, lions, and bears. Oh my, like fucking...
Yeah, all of that. That's what I was trying to say.
What was that video you showed me, Tim? Like there's the tall dude with the...
Oh, the one who's like, I'm a giraffe because I'm tall. I don't know why I can't just be tall.
But like that's his animal tribe, is the giraffes, because he's fucking tall. And I don't know. So I don't think enough men really take the time to kind of look at themselves and how they approach those things. And so I think a lot of men kind of give themselves the excuse of not being in control, quote unquote, of how they approach people, or treat people. There is something in culture that when things are left unchecked, it can go in a certain direction. And I think probably something a little bit more relevant to here is how women are always told they need to defend themselves. You need to take karate lessons. When you walk home at night, make sure you've got your keys between your hands. But nobody's telling boys not to rape women. It's very that. We deliberately tell boys, boys will be boys, which is our way of saying, oh, he's going to go and do what he's going to do, and we all need to be prepared to turn a blind eye to that. And we raise our young men with the excuse in hand of, I'm not responsible for my own actions. Everyone else around me is. And that is something that women often have to bear the brunt of, not by choice, but by cultural obligation. So things like that. And maybe it doesn't feel like it, male listeners, maybe it doesn't feel like that for that comparison, but everything starts from somewhere, and accountability is a big part of that. So something as simple as checking on how you look at people can actually end up being a very, very big thing.
Yes.
But I do want to ask, because we're talking about this a little bit, how did you actually discover the duality and expansiveness when it comes to your attraction to both women and men? Was it men first and women after, the other way around? How'd that all...
Well, I'll preface it by saying that for the first 18 years of my life, I'm 45 now, I had no same-sex attraction at all. None. Didn't exist. It all kind of fell into my lap. I came into gaining by accident, by stumbling onto the old Gainer website, which is now stashed somewhere in the Internet Archive since it hasn't been updated in a dog's age. And not only realizing that I liked men, and I liked big men, and I liked big men who were getting bigger. I mean, it was a perfect storm. It was basically taking pineapple juice, strawberry puree, and fresh mangoes and blending them all together, and then taking a sip of it, and you're like, holy shit, that's great, And
then someone goes, let's put some champagne on that bitch and call it a Bellini. And let's real get into... Okay, by the way, I do own my whiteness when it comes to a Bellini. I am very much that girl. I will have 7 of them in a row. I'm taking my top off at brunch. I am a mess. I'm screaming. I am picking fights with people on purpose, and I'm being carted away by security. I am very much that girl.
Yeah. But no, it was men first for the longest time. And then I managed to find somebody on Yahoo ages ago, back when Yahoo had groups in Yahoo Messenger, and this wonderful Black chick from Missouri City, Texas, outside of Houston, messaged me, and we developed a relationship, and at some point a friendship and then a relationship. And it turns out that she was an FA, a fat admirer, and she wanted me to be her big, handsome boyfriend. And I will tell you this with confidence, that in a span of one college semester here in the US, in Arkansas, in Little Rock, I gained nearly 30 pounds.
Dang, son.
So from my 26th birthday, around that time in 2002, until just before the 4th of July, I put on about 25 pounds.
That's beautiful. Listen, when it's right, it's right. Mm, God damn.
Yeah, the one drawback I'll say about it is I had trouble at a point fitting into some of the desks in my classroom in college because my belly had gotten so big. I was taking an American civics class, U.S. government and things like that, and I distinctly remember having to sit sideways in the chair, not completely all the way in, but basically sideways because there was no more room for my gut.
Oof, sounds absolutely awful. I would have absolutely hated to have seen you in such a position. I would have had to have come over immediately to assist you with finding a much more suitable chair, which probably would have been my face, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, yeah. But I am a product of what they call here in the United States the freshman 15. The proclivity of people to put on ungodly amounts of weight in college because their eating habits are unrestrained. I will say this: when I entered college in 1994, at the age of 18, I weighed 220 pounds, and I was wearing a size 34 waist. 3 years later, I was about 270 and in the size 42. So I did the freshman 15 and the sophomore 20. So I'm a college gainer. I'm one of those people that got to college and just ate everything in sight, just ballooned. And it was around that time that I discovered gaining by accident. And of course, because of that, I just realized, you know what? I got plenty of food here. I like big guys, and I've always enjoyed being fat. So I just threw myself into it, head first. So yeah, so that's why. And again, my girlfriend at the time enjoyed my company. She was a feeder. There were a couple of times when she actually did feed me donuts one night watching a movie in a midnight showing of Resident Evil in the theater in Houston. So she did know the feeding component of it, at least from the heterosexual side of things. But sadly, that relationship didn't pan out. I lost her but kept the weight. So I started out with being interested in guys and things like that, and then at one point, I found somebody found in me as far as the straight side of things to enjoy my company, put on weight. Ever since then, it's really just been guys, as far as the gaining aspect's concerned. But as I've gotten older, I've started to find women attractive again, not just because of being bisexual, but just because I find big people attractive. It doesn't matter if they're male, female, even male guys, gals, and non-binary pals. To sum it up nicely.
I like that. And listen, regards to the breakup, there are worse things to take away in a divorce settlement. You keep the weight. We happy to hear it. But it makes me curious to question this. It's like, so within the gay gainer community, Tim and I think many of our listeners can understand this. There's this sort of approach to how you might come into gainer sex. There's the idea that you will find someone attractive, you will be in the same area, you'll have your typical flirting, and then you meet up and do the thing, which sometimes there's feeding, sometimes it's just sex.
Right.
For everyone, right? But we kind of have a narrative in our head about how you go from start to finish. What is that like when it comes to women and the kind of straight approach to things?
It's less to a big guy because there isn't as much initial pressure to say, hey, I'm interested in you, and we're going to get to a point where we're going to have food and fun and sex. One of the things that I remember, and I can probably explain best, is when you're interested in somebody, heterosexually, a woman, and she's of size, she might be a little chunky, might be pretty big. You're more than likely to go to a restaurant and just be yourselves. A lot of people are afraid of being themselves in a restaurant. Like they might order, something kind of light, like a little salad, They don't want to order what they would normally order. Like if they're hungry, they'll order whatever they feel like eating. And sometimes you base your food choices on whoever's next to you. Like if you're in a restaurant with somebody who's skinny, you're going to feel ashamed ordering the big ass steak, salad, potato, and they might order just, a salad and some wraps. If you're a guy of my size and I'm going to dinner with somebody who's my size, I don't want them to feel bad to say, hey, you know, order what you want. I'm not going to judge you based on what the waiter or waitress brings out. Like if they bring out this big ass plate of food and you eat it, I'm okay with that. I don't want you to feel that you have to restrict yourself in terms of what you do, how you would normally eat around me. That goes for anybody. Like if I went to dinner with either of you, either in London or in Cleveland, if y'all wanted to get the big greasy, juicy hamburger or whatever, then yeah, feel free to do so.
Oh, I would. Trust and believe.
Absolutely. And then dessert after all that too.
And then dessert. Yeah. So as someone who's been in the community for quite a while, I think you said you're 45, is that correct?
Yes, I am. I am 45. I'm an old guy.
I'm finally not the oldest person in the room.
For a long time, I think I've been sort of insinuating with Tim, I don't think there is a human being alive older than Tim. But here you are, in the flesh, proof. Tim, how do you feel about that?
I feel great because I'm finally, like I said, I'm not the oldest person that we're talking to. Like, I mean, we've had other guests on that were older than me, but it's like been so few and far between.
So, as someone who is a bit older, you've been in the community for a long time. You've been in it through different phases of its existence as well. Like, so what are some of the biggest changes you've seen, both on the gay side of things and on the straight side of things?
2 words: the internet.
Yeah.
When I first started, there was a site called Grommr, which was, I liken it to be Grommr's great grandfather, basically, because there have been sites that have filled the gap between what Grommr was and what Grommr is. And Grommr technically doesn't exist anymore because it has been updated and it's on the Internet Archive. But Grommr kind of filled the gap that a lot of websites did not do. So that's the biggest thing. Because when I first started, Grommr was a little of everything. You had pictures and personals, you had stories. The story archive is still there. There are probably a good 100 stories of just really good, not safe for work gainer fiction. Everything from just kind of fluffy, like G-rated stuff to stuff that's PG-13. That's just good old-fashioned gainer stories, with lots of sex in it. But the internet has changed things a lot because now, excuse me, now that you have everybody basically attached to a phone in their hand, now you can explore your gainer side, whether you want to be, whether you're young and just starting out or whether you've been around, you've got the internet to basically fill that gap, because there was very little back then as far as gaining. I mean, if without Grommr and Belly Builders, there would have been no such thing as Beefy Frat, which was a gainer site that kind of came up kind of somewhere in the middle that took off but didn't really last. And then I don't remember what filled the gap between Beefy Frat and Grommr. There was another site that had come along and everybody had jumped on it, and then it shut down, and then Grommr came around and everybody's jumped on it, and it's been around for, I would think, about a decade now, give or take.
Yeah, a decade.
Yeah. They celebrated a decade last year, I think.
Yeah, so it's managed to survive. One of the nice things is a lot of the people that I know on Grommr I met either through original Grommr or Belly Builders. Heck, matter of fact, I first found out about gaining through something called IRC, or Internet Relay Chat, which was completely text-based, command line. Long before there was a nice shiny graphical interface to put on gaining.
I remember that too.
Yeah. So a lot of the people that I met through the Gay Gainers channel on IRC are some of the people that are still on Grommr. Some have migrated to it, some have disappeared. I mean, it is life, it's one of those things, where people kind of cycle in and out and say, you know what, I'm not interested in gaining and I'm not really worried about it. So I'm not on this side or I'm not on this side. I've been around long enough, but every so often you'll still cross a path and you'll find somebody that you used to talk to 5 years ago or 15 years ago, and they still remember you and you still remember them. But more so, I'd like to say that it is really the internet. The hard part about both sides of things is for the cishet gaining community. They have their own set of resources. They have a website called Dimensions Magazine. It used to be a print magazine, but now it's a big ass message board, and it focuses on the BBW, BHM, FA side of things. You do find some same-sex people chatting on there, but it still leans heavily more towards the straight side of things and gaining and whatnot, gaining and feeding. I generally tend to think of gaining the term more for the LGBT side of things, and I tend to think of feeding and whatnot more for the cishet straight side of things. And I mean, it is semantics and they do cross paths, but I talk to more people that I know who are gainers on Grommr and sites like that, and fewer people who are into feeding, you know, who would be on the dimension side of things. And of course, there's there's Phoebe, which is part of the Grommr or Grokkio network. There's Fantasy Feeder, and then there's a few other places. But as for the gay side of things, there's Grommr, there was Beefy Frat, there's Chaseable, if you will, you know, for Chubs and Chasers, which that kind of crosses the path too. There's still Bigger City. There's HeftyNet, you know, there's a lot of sites out there that don't inherently cater to the gaining community, but you will find gainers on them. One thing I've noticed is there are a couple of sites that a lot of people are on there as gainers, but they don't want to be lumped in with the gaining community because of what they've heard about the gaining community. Right. Bigger City, by and large, I love the site. I used to be on it ages ago, and then I came back in January to basically fool around and chat with people. And I have run into a few gainers on there, but they seem to be more interested in telling people I'm a chub, but not a gainer, rather than being on Grommr that says, hey, I'm a gainer and I just happen to be chubby, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious to explore, you know, I think you sort of touched on it for a second there. You know, there are people who don't want to identify as a gainer because of what they hear. And I'm kind of curious to know from your perspective what they hear, in quotation marks, I should say, because listeners can't see.
Right.
What do you think it is that they hear? Do you think it's they see the way that gay gainers present themselves on the internet and they find that off-putting? Do you think it's the way that our world culture, by and large, understands gaining in a colloquial construct? What do you?
I think that gaining, of all the kinks and fetishes and affinities that exist in, I'm not going to say the LGBT world, but as far as the stuff that tends to be more sexual, I think gaining is the bastard child of all of it, because you can present yourself and your kink the way you want. Like you can, like if you're in the pup community, pup play, you can wear your pup hood in public. You can wear, if you're collared, you can wear your big ass master lock around your neck. You can do that in public. But gaining seems to be that kink that you have to go down a really dark hallway in a really seedy part of town where there's no lights, and you have to knock on a door and issue a secret passphrase to get into that community. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, we were speaking to a friend just yesterday after recording even then. And, you know, there's a point to be made. And, you know, as a black man, I don't know if you might identify with this, but, you know, there does seem to be this link between fat phobia and racism, where at some point people try to justify the vitriol in science. So like back in the day, they tried to be like, well, clearly the black man is inferior. Look at the shape of his skull. This clearly means blah, 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 blah. It means nothing because scientifically it is nothing. And yet people heard scientifically this means, and then they went, oh, well then that just justifies all of this fucking bullshit. And it took time for that to get unpacked and for people to be like, no, that's truly false. And in the same way, people do that with fat bodies. They point to fat bodies and they go, well, look at this bloated, fat thing. They're so unhealthy. They're so disgusting. No wonder they're so unhealthy. They cost us billions and trillions a year in healthcare taxes. That's why they're bad. And that's why you shouldn't feel bad for bullying them to lose weight, because they need to hear the harsh truth and all this and blah, blah. But once again, the science showcases that fat actually doesn't directly cause fucking nothing.
I love how you mentioned, like, if you're into some other kinks, you can do it in a public space and no one seems to give a shit. But, if you're a gainer, it's like, oh my God, what are you doing? And I've said many times before, and I'll say it again, it's a weird world when something like having a fist shoved up your ass is more socially acceptable.
Yes. Yeah. That is part of the line of thinking, because I liken it like this. I know a lot of people into a lot of various kinks. It's like 20 or 30 different circles of Venn diagrams that are floating around me. And if somebody's interested in fisting or pub play or piss play or whatever, I probably know somebody who's into it. I can almost tell you some of the people I know probably are into several of it at the same time. I know a lot of people who are into gaining, but it's really not, I'm not saying it's not socially acceptable, but it's not something, that you can really present in public. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and you chow down, let's say you go to a buffet and you eat your heart's content out, some people might leer at you because they think you're being a pig when you're kind of exhibiting your kink in public, But what he said is exactly right. I mean, you can do any number of kinks that are far more eye-raising and head-scratching than being somebody who is big and wants to eat and grow bigger. Like I said, it's gaining. Gaining has always felt to me like that redheaded stepchild. It's the reason why so many people on Grommr, whenever there's some, pardon my English, salty bitch who gets upset and wants to basically throw Grommr from under the bus into the public eye, that so many people recoil. They hide their faces even more so than they used to. And they're like, oh, let me not be on here for a week or two. Let me let it settle down, But like I said, gaining, as far as it relates to the LGBT side of things, is something you have to do in private. If you are on the cishet side of things and you're a couple, there are documentaries and TV shows I've seen of really big women and their much smaller partners talking publicly and openly about the FD lifestyle. You will probably never ever get that on the LGBT side for talking about the gaining lifestyle. It's just something that seems to be so disruptive to the status quo as far as a kink is concerned that it will never ever be welcome. There's a reason why Grommr and its sites are, if I'm not mistaken, they're not indexed by Google and other search engines so that people can't just stumble onto our community accidentally. I believe that's how it is. I could be wrong.
You're absolutely right about the status quo comment. I mean, like, because we've talked before about what society and gay society, like, and I'm going to speak specifically about gay men. I feel like this doesn't necessarily apply to members of the lesbian or transgender or bisexual community, but like with gay men, because we've had it pounded into our head that all gay men are supposed to be unbelievably gorgeous. We're all supposed to have incredible bodies that are almost impossible to achieve. We're all supposed to be image obsessed. We're all supposed to be fashionistas. We're all supposed to be, these paradigms of culture and sophistication, that anything that goes against that, it's like like you said, they rail against it because it's like, no, you're going to shatter the illusion. We're all perfect and we have to stay perfect.
Here's a question for you, because as older, and I wouldn't even say older guy, like in the grand scheme of things, I don't think 40s or even
No,
50s.
that's young. That's young by today's standards.
That's young.
Right.
I would say 50s is when you start to hit middle age. I'd still consider you quite young personally.
Mhm.
I feel
Okay.
like you don't even hit old until you're in your 70s at this point, because people are living into their 90s and past. So
Right?
That's true.
So, like, at your current age, do you feel like you experience ageism in the gainer community? And if so,
Absolutely.
talk to us about that.
My problem is I've been in the gaming world more or less since I was 20. And I'm still a late bloomer to it because I never got to experience gaining weight with other people. Most of my weight gains that came in college came at a time, when the internet didn't exist and I didn't have, friends or acquaintances who were into gaining and realized that was my thing. The biggest issue I have with ageism, it happens a lot on Grommr, because I'll get a lot of looks at guys. I get a lot of looks from guys who are basically between the ages of like 18 and 24, which is understandable, and I appreciate that. But the problem is there's so much of a generational gap that we'll never have really anything in common. And I don't want to tell somebody, hey, I appreciate you checking me out, but you're 21, I'm 45. I don't want to make you mad, and I don't want to be somebody that's labeled, oh, this guy doesn't like younger people. But it's really hard to rationalize it and say, I like who I like based on age, and I'm not trying to dismiss the 18 to 25 crowd because they've still got a ways to go. I mean, the things that I've been through in my life, in my mid 40s, gaining weight, and then of course I'm diabetic, so I've had to fix my body to try to counteract some of the things I did in my 30s to try to put on weight. A lot of people don't understand that, so that's more of a divide than anything else. I don't look for people at a certain age, but one thing I have noticed is there are some guys who will check me out on a regular basis, and they all tend to be between 18 and 25. And again, that's perfectly fine. But they haven't accomplished or haven't done much of anything on this planet yet to correlate to what I've been through. So we can chat, but it's an uphill climb. I generally, the experience I've had as far as age, most of the gainers I've talked to who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, I generally get along better with them because we're all adults and we've made the concession that, we're big and this is how our bodies respond to it. Certain things that we eat, certain things that we do, just the way that metabolism has shifted. We're the guys like me and older are at a point now where we realize, you know what, we can try as hard as we want. We will never lose this weight. So we should just lean into it. Some gainers, I know most of the ones who are putting on weight are in their 50s and 60s. So they've leaned into it heavily. And I admit I like how they look. I doubt I will look as good as they do when they hit that age, because I've had to basically fix my body so that it works a lot better at my age, in my mid 40s. But I'm not going to say I experience ageism, but I generally don't put myself out there with a focus on being attractive to the younger set. It is what it is. But I'm not going to tell somebody specifically, hey, I appreciate your interest, but you're too young. I'll never do that, because then basically that's not my personality. I would never do that. Likewise, I would never tell somebody, hey, you're 70 years old, you're too old for me. It's part of my personality to never tell somebody something that I wouldn't want to hear myself. So yes, do I experience ageism? A little bit, but it's one of those things I don't have to worry about, because I put so much of myself out there on Grommr as far as, who I am and what I do, that maybe it is attractive to some people who are younger than me, but it's like the amusement park, you got to be this tall to ride,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I've had some interesting experiences when it comes to like age on Grommr. Like,
Mhm.
I remember I was trying to reach out to someone who was local
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a sex thing. It was not like I was saying, oh my God, you're so hot and we should hook up and everything. I was more like just extending the offer for like, hey, you want to go get a cup of coffee? You want to go get a meal together? Like, do you want to talk about this openly maybe for the first time in your life? Because just
Mm-hmm.
trying to build a gainer social circle.
Mm-hmm.
And their response to me was, you're too old for me. Sorry. And I think
Yeah.
I was only 34 at the time, which I thought, I don't know why you think 34 is, and this was a person who was in their mid 20s. So there was less than a decade between us.
Right.
And then on the other half of things, like I've been fetishized for my age because I fall
Mm-hmm.
into the daddy category.
Right.
And I've played with that before. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I've been daddy to a few people and as it served me well in that moment, but it was like, it wasn't going to go any further than that. Like someone who was like just entering college who like they wanted me to be their daddy. I was like, oh, sweetie, you haven't seen enough yet.
I haven't really experienced ageism because I haven't had anyone up front tell me that I'm too old or too young. I know that supposedly 30 is the gay death. And if 30 is the gay death, then at 45, to quote Ghostbusters, I'm a full torso, free floating apparition, like Slimer. I'm a ghost, Now, granted, I would like to think that if some of these 18, 19, 20-year-old people would actually message me and reach out to me and ask me, hey, listen, I'm 20 years old. Gaining is starting to be a thing for me. If they ask me for advice, I'll gladly give it to them, but what they may hear is the unblemished truth, and the truth hurts. So they may not be ready to hear that. So I generally leave that alone. But truthfully, as for ageism, haven't had an issue with it. Haven't had anybody tell me I'm too old or too young for them. If some of these younger folks want to reach out, I'd be interested in giving them advice. Have either of you ever heard of the half your age plus 7 thing?
No.
Yeah, when I was in Bible college, that was a whole thing. That was
what does that even mean?
It basically means that as far as an age difference, you really shouldn't be pursuing or be pursued by anyone who, prime example, I'm 45, so let's round it up to 46. Take half my age, which is 23, and add 7 to it, so that's 30. So the belief is that at my age of 45, I should be interested in somebody who's 30, or they should be interested in me. So that way there isn't as much of a quote unquote controversial age gap,
Oh, okay.
And don't get me wrong, I don't like leaning into that because it generally means that there might be somebody who's 25, 26, who's been through a lot, who's kind of mature, who might be interested in me. But the thing is, the younger somebody is, the more they have to really play catch up. And I don't know if I want to slow down and wait for them. Now, there is one person on Grommr who is 20. He's very mature, and I chat with him all the time. So he would probably be more of an exception to the rule that I would actually talk to somebody, because they at least have some structure. They're in college, they're studying, they might be pursuing 3 or 4 languages and trying to be more mature and soaking up as much of life as humanly possible. But for most of the people that I see who are 18, 19, 20 years old, I mean, they're not legally able to do much of anything. They can't buy cigarettes, they can't buy beer, they can't rent a car, So they kind of have to play catch up. And again, I don't really want to slow down my life for them, because my life's moving at a pretty good clip. And I mean, if you're not at the station when the train's coming, you will get left behind.
I think that's
well put.
So in your journey, you've expressed yourself to be so uniquely positioned in both communities. Do you find that either or both sides cause you to feel alienated because of your attraction to the other?
Yes. One thing I've learned in the last 5 or 6 years, as I finally became comfortable with my sexuality, bi/pan, is you're not welcome in really either house. If you associate yourself with some gay people, they are okay with it, but a lot of them sometimes have met bisexual or pansexual people who aren't sure where they fit yet, and they don't want to wait around. So they kind of feel there's a little bit of non-committalness. I'm too gay for the straight people and not gay enough for the gay people, or something like that. So there has been a little bit of alienation because I'm not going to say I'm uniquely positioned, but I know a lot of gainers on Grommr and other places who have been either in relationships with women who are married to women, who are pursuing this kink by talking to other men as opposed to talking to other women, who might be interested in it. And it kind of alienates me a little bit because I don't talk to enough women who are into gaining, feeding, encouraging to basically have a more diverse life, to say, hey, I know all these gay guys, but I know this chick who likes to go to Dairy Queen or someplace and she really likes to eat, and we can hang out and she can feed me, I can feed her, we can rub bellies, we can cuddle, make out, whatever. I do feel more alienated by the gay community because of that little B, that B being bisexual, and them wondering, if I pursue this guy with any intent, is he going to be committed to me, or do I have to play second fiddle to somebody else?
Hell, I experienced that in just regular gay relationships. I mean, that's no more complicated than my ex-husband was a cheater, so like I dealt with that, not even, just being like in a straight up gay relationship. It's because how many times do we have to say that there's no difference? Like, it's just it's a human insecurity thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Like cheating, like why? I always kind of think about this. As much as I can appreciate cheating is like not a nice thing, I always look at it like people who go out, they like break their car, they like threaten to kill them, and I'm like, what is the concept of sex without you that is so triggering that is the kind of response? Like, does no one ever deep dive into like that's a problem? That's a problem with people, that like that is an appropriate response. I'm not saying you're not entitled to feeling a bit shitty and maybe needing to think about things, but a bit of murder, it's I don't feel like that equates with the issue that occurs.
The punishment doesn't fit the crime.
No.
And I mean, I can tell you that, like, for me, it's like infidelity as far as sex is not really the deal breaker. The deal breaker is like, if I'm with someone and they go off and have a dalliance, and then they decide that they're going to pursue that dalliance to the point that they want to be with that person over me, I mean, that's an issue for me. And I'm not advocating anything here, but like, my experience with my ex-husband is like, I didn't start stepping out until well after he had been doing it. And my mentality at the time was like, well, he's not keeping his promises, so why should I keep mine? Not saying that's right. I'm just saying that that's where I was mentally, but I don't think that just cheating in general is something that deserves that's like what James was saying, that severe of a reaction.
Right. No, truthfully, I can't really say I've been alienated, because I think if I have been, it's been quiet. It's not something that somebody will tell me up front, oh, I'm not interested in you because of who you are or what you've done. It's subterfuge. I'll see it more so in explanations on profiles on the web. I mean, it's honestly bad enough that I'm alienated because of my ethnicity. I get that, I could ask the questions. I could ask all the questions in the world and I'll never get a straight answer. I'm not too worried about that because it is what it is. But identifying as somebody who's pursued both men and women, depending on who the person is, can be anything from comfort and basically saying that's okay, to something that is a complete deal breaker, an unforgivable sin. And I can't convince anybody any way or the other, hey, you'll understand me or like me because I've dated men and women, because I do find fat men attractive and I find fat women attractive. You make your decision based on what's in your head. I could convince you all I could convince you until my lungs give out and my head hurts. But at some point, I'll just say, you know what? If I can't convince you, that's your problem. That's not mine. It's my cross to bear. I've got enough wood. I'm not going to pile any more on you. So you do what you do, you boo boo, as the saying goes.
Mm. So a listener question here, and I think we've kind of already touched on this a bit, but in a growing world of divergent sexual and gender identities, how do you maintain a sense of confidence and security in the labels you choose for yourself? And I think we've already kind of touched on that in terms of you don't tend to define yourself too much, but maybe I'll rephrase that a bit and say, what advice would you give to people who maybe feel like they're in a similar boat between?
Okay. Well, I still carry a label because in my brain, I need to quantify it, at least in terms of telling somebody either in person or a profile that I'm bi or I'm pan or something. So that way they have a frame of reference. It's unfortunate that we still have to do that in society as people are becoming more aware of the various aspects within the LGBT community, non-binary, gender fluid, whatever. So I think we all still have to carry a tiny little label to explain to people who don't get it initially. But my thing is, because I'm kind of a late bloomer sexually, but also coming into gaining when I did. Well, I came into gaining early, but late blooming sexually. As I have matured, I had to just put it out there and rubber stamp it and let the ink dry on it and say, hey, my name is Jeremiah Adams. This is who I am. This is how I identify. I've had to mentally say it so that it sticks. So that way I'm not going back in my head and saying, oh, I think of myself as bi or pansexual. I don't really want to think about trying to move the needle to change the labels, to identify myself, to explain myself to somebody differently. I liken it to having a vehicle, and it could be a Ford, it could be a Chevy, it could be a Dodge. It's a Ford. It's always going to be a Ford. You can take the nameplate off. You can take as much of the stuff off the inside. You can pretty much change that vehicle. But at the end of the day, it still says Ford. You can change the look of the vehicle, but the vehicle is going to be the same. For me, I guess I'm still moving the needle on which label suits me. But as I've matured, I have to be content to say, I came into this late and I'm finally figuring it out, and this is how I identify. If you're okay with it, that's perfectly fine. If you're not okay with it, either you're not okay with it or I'll try to explain it in such a way that it makes some sense. So I think your question about advice for someone is take the time to figure out where you fit. Don't let anybody rush you into picking a side. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't be this person or that person based on what you've done or what you haven't done. And one of the questions that you asked is, what do you think the different gainer communities could learn from each other? I think if we take down the necessity of it being carnal, then I think the BBW, BHM, FA community, the cishet side, and the gainer side, the gay guys, could basically close that divide by basically saying, we're all fat people, we like other fat people, and we like wanting to be fat. We shouldn't say, oh, because I'm heterosexual and in a committed relationship, that I want to be fat, but it doesn't have to be overt. And the gay side saying, I want to be fat, but I don't want to think about it in terms of it being a purely sexual interest. I just want to say, I'm a fat gay guy. That guy's cute. I'm a fat chick. that guy's cute. You know, there have been a couple of people I've talked to, and it seems to happen a lot on Grommr, that if you're a straight guy and you're fat and another guy tells you that you're fat and you look good, it could easily tell that straight person that this person may think of them in a sexual nature, and they don't want to be thought of as sexually attractive to another man, because it kind of it kind of goes against the status quo of what is defined by, you know, being heterosexual versus being LGBT, you know, that sexual component. At my age, if a woman were to walk up to me right now and tell me I was attractive, I would tell her thank you. I wouldn't think anything of it. I wouldn't try to put my brain in a sense of some kind of weird carnal fantasy. If a guy came up to me and told me I look good, I would tell him thank you. I wouldn't think about it in that sense either. I would just accept a compliment from whomever and say, you know what, that person thinks I look good. Guess what? You know, I'll take off my shirt in my hotel room or my bedroom. I'll look at myself and say, you know what? A guy looked at me today and he said I look good. A gal looked at me today and said I look good. And you know what? I look good too.
Absolutely. You know, I think there's something really beautiful in that sometimes the sexual element of gaining, I think, holds some people back because we
Yes.
see it as pure sex. But
Right.
actually, gaining isn't just sex. Gaining is social, it's
Mhm.
emotional, it's platonic. I find that as I've pursued literally a lifestyle in gaining, almost all of my friends are fat, men and women.
Right.
I don't find myself wanting to fuck my female friends, but I know that somewhere in the subconscious, there is this understanding that you are fat and I am fat. And on
Mhm.
some kind of a gaining level, I connect with you in a way that is real and isn't wrong. It doesn't defy my expectations or my sense of understanding of self. It's just a lived experience. And
Mhm.
maybe if we were all a bit more open with potential for things, maybe we wouldn't get so worked up when these little things come our way.
I agree. On Tumblr, I see it a lot in various reblogs. I see pictures of assumingly heterosexual guys, you know, with shirts up after they drank a bunch of beer, and you know they're admiring their friends' bellies. There's no sexual intonation there. It's just guys admiring guys. I know guys who hang out and drink beer all the time. You know, they may be away from their wives and girlfriends. They may say that one fellow's putting on a gut, you know, and they might lift up her shirt and they might rub that belly, you know. There's no sexual intonation that it's an admiration of the fact that having a gut as a guy is inherently universal. I mean, in the heterosexual side of things, they're not thinking, oh, I want to cuddle with my buddy and fatten him up. You know, I just want to say, hey, man, you're fat, I'm fat. Um, I do think that once we kind of take down some of the carnal thoughts about it and just appreciate people for being big and their size, then I think it would be a lot. I think it would be a lot easier. There's a few people on Tumblr, you know, a lot of straight gainer type folks who have girlfriends and things. I would just love to tell them as a guy that I like how they look, but I don't want them to be put off by the idea that it's another guy telling them that, rather than being approached online by big girls and feeders, you know, that sort of thing. There was one person who I used to follow on Tumblr, but they basically said, I don't want any interaction from other men. I totally get that. And I felt kind of put off because they were kind of restricting themselves from the admiration that they deserve to say, hey, you know, even though I am a straight guy, you know, another guy who is into gaining thinks I look good, and that might actually spur them subconsciously to put on weight, not just for the admiration of not for the admiration of anybody, but at least to be able to take down that wall and say, you know, somebody somewhere found me attractive, you know.
That's beautiful. But that brings us to the end of this episode. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Not a problem.
Where can people find you online?
Well, Grommr, I am Yogurt and Whiskey. That's YOGURT and whiskey, all one word. That's where I generally tend to hang out. I do have an Instagram, but it is not a gainer-focused Instagram. I won't mention that here. I do follow gainers on there, but mainly Grommr. And if somebody messages me on Grommr, I can give them my contact information. I'm on all the sites: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Discord, that sort of thing. But typically start from Grommr and we'll work from there.
Beautiful. That's fantastic. So look, that brings us to the end of another episode here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. As always, you can find me on Grommr, Instagram, and TikTok at stannnum, and Twitter and YouTube at stannnum.bsky.
You can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc. And of course, you can find more of what we talked about today on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Patreon at Thicc Radio. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stan and Thicc.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Body by Cream.